Welcome to the Romancing Like Swift podcast, where we talk craft and the business of being an author while fangirling over Taylor Swift. We're your hosts, Morgana, Bevan,
and Emily Jane. On this podcast, we'll discuss what authors can learn from Taylor Swift. There are many amazing Taylor Swift podcasts in existence. We know this, but our focus is on mining Taylor Swift's lyrics and business practices for tips to help our fellow authors excel in their careers.
Today we got Damon Courtney from BookFunnel with us to share all the things he's learned from Taylor, because I've been watching some of your previous talks and I've seen your slide deck where you go, I'm a Swiftie. So that's why I was like, we need Damon on.
It's funny because I am absolutely a Swiftie. I have a picture of me in the slide deck that you're talking about. It's a picture of my wife and I in LA at the Eras tour. Just to briefly tell the story, I was a Swiftie before my wife. She had heard the sort of, she's like, oh, right, that was that Shake It Off song, right? So she'd heard some of her music, but I really wanted to go to the Eras tour and she loves me. And so she's like, I got you tickets and I'm going with you, even though, whatever. But of course, she left the Eras tour on her way to becoming a fan. And now she's a much bigger Swiftie than I am. She's the one who's like, oh, well, in this track, she actually meant this. And she was singing about this. Okay. It's funny because I actually started thinking about it. The talk that I gave and the one that you saw where I actually had the picture in there of Taylor and then talking about myself and being a Swiftie was that it was a talk about direct sales specifically, which has become a really big topic for the last couple of years among authors. I wanted to give this talk because I think when authors think about direct sales, everybody kind of goes to the same place, which is like, oh God, I don't want to set up a bookstore and do all of that sort of stuff. And yet there were so many amazing ways that I saw authors out there that were doing direct sales in different ways. I wanted to talk about that. But what I started with and then started to tie it back to Taylor was what we kind of call the reader's journey, which is that first, they don't know who you are. They've never read your books. Congratulations. There's 8 billion people in the world who've never read your books. So there's a lot of upside. And then they've maybe read one of your books. Most people read a book and they're like, oh, that was good. I like that book. That was nice. Very rarely would you say that you read a book, a single individual book, and then call yourself a fan of that author. You might say, oh, I love that book. You think about the books that blew up around the world and you're like, oh, Live, Laugh, Love and Eat, Pray, Love. And you're like, oh my God, what an amazing book. And yet ask people who the author was, most people don't know. But in genre fiction, which is what I read, I'm a fantasy sci-fi geek. But once I read a second book, well, then I'm like, okay, well, this is really good. I actually really like this author. And I'm now sort of on my way to becoming a fan of that author. And then eventually, hopefully, as authors, we all want to move people into that superfan range, which is where Taylor is absolutely masterful at creating superfans. And my wife is a perfect example. And me, I first listened to Taylor. My nieces were into her, right? And I heard some of her songs. I was like, hey, she's a pretty good songwriter. I like that music. That was pretty cool. And then over the years, she would release new albums and I would hear a few songs, usually the radio hits or the ones that sort of broke out. And I would hear a few of those songs. And then eventually I made a playlist of all of those songs. But then I started creeping over into superfan territory. And when we talk about superfans, in terms of any art, we're authors and we're talking about the author world. But superfans are those who will buy everything that you put out into the world for the rest of their lives, right? They become a super fan. And I always say, I ask everybody in the audience, I say, raise your hand if you are a super fan of an author. And everybody raises their hands because we're all readers first. We all started as readers before we went. I mean, I guess not everybody did, but almost every author that I meet is a pretty voracious reader. And you can't read your whole life without eventually finding some authors who are like, that I will buy everything that they publish. Just like, you got a new book out. I don't care. Shut up and take my money. That was my tie-in because she's so good at converting people. Number one, somebody like me through her art. I didn't follow her Insta. I didn't know anything about her world other than, hey, I really like her music. And then, I remember the exact moment. So it was during COVID. And at the time, we were in a very small house and I was working out of the laundry room because that was the office. And so my wife couldn't dry clothes while I was working, or I'd get smoked out of the laundry room, or I'd get steamed out of the laundry room. So I'm working in the laundry room. During COVID, my kids were home because school's all shut down and we decided to homeschool our kids for a year and a half. I was like, I'm going to need to put some headphones on and listen to something or I'm not going to be able to get any work done. And I happened to bring up Amazon Music, and Folklore had just been released. And I was like, oh, I like Taylor Swift. I like her music. At that point, I would say I was on my way to becoming a fan, but not quite yet. I knew of her music, but if you'd asked me if I was a fan, I probably would not have said, oh yeah, I'm a fan. I would have been like, I like her music. What I've heard of her is good. I put on Folklore, and I don't know if you can tell already in just the 5 minutes we've been talking, I have ADHD. So I like to just put on something and just let it go. If I allow myself to skip around, then I'll just keep skipping. And now I'm not working. Now I'm DJing. I'm not actually getting any code done. So I was like, okay, well, she's got this new album out. I like her music so far. I'll just put it on and let it roll. I'll just play it all the way through. I hadn't done that probably since I was a teenager. I think most people now listen to music as, oh, I like that song, and we all sort of DJ our own playlists rather than listening to what the artist wanted you to hear. I put all these songs here and I put them in this order because I wanted you to hear it this way. And I hadn't done that in forever. And yet I did that. And that was the moment where I was like, oh man, she's really good. Every song just hits. And I probably ended up listening to that album. Again, the ADHD, it's like, no, I want the same thing over and over again because it lets me focus on something else. I probably listened to that album 30 times, just all the way through every time while I was working. And that turned me into a Swiftie, right?
Actually, Folklore is the album that turned me into a Swiftie. But I didn't listen to the album when it dropped. I watched the Pond studio recordings.
Oh, yeah. Love that.
Yeah. It was having the extra input of her explaining what went into each track that just, I was a goner from that point on. She appealed to something in me that just hooked me, and that was the end of that.
And I think that's a good example, and it's something that I talk about with authors, which is that I would say the biggest difference between what an author is trying to do and what Taylor is out there doing is we are not performers. I mean, I'm sure there are some authors out there, but I've met some very big authors, and they are not the people that you're necessarily going to be like, woo, get on stage, let's go, right? In fact, we tend to be, not myself, obviously, but tend to be a little introverted, a little quieter. Like sometimes you get the sort of flashier ones, but for the most part, I mean, lovely people that you would love to talk to, but not performers, right? How do you put yourself out there into the world in a way that people can find you? Because like I had the exact same experience. I watched the Ponds recording and I loved the backstory on what those songs were about because I had my own ideas. I had listened to them and I'm like, oh, that's something like illicit affairs. I'm like, did Taylor have an illicit affair? And then you find out like, oh, no. This was more of a creative album where she wasn't so much singing about herself
supposedly
and her own life experiences. But when you first listen to that song, you're like, what is she talking about? I mean, it's obvious what she's talking about, but is it herself she's talking about? But how do you do that as an author? And there's a lot of resistance from authors specifically who don't necessarily want to share personal details about themselves. And you don't always have to. The number one thing that you can do is just write more books. That's the thing that's going to make people fall in love. Like I said, I will pick up a new author and I will read one of their books and I go, that was good. Because I'm a genre reader, I like to read in series. If the book one was good enough, I then go on to book two. I read book two and I go, oh, that's really good. And now I'd say, well, I kind of like this author. I've read two of their books and now I read. Most readers, once they're 3 books in, they're hooked. Maybe not a super fan yet, but definitely a fan. Nobody reads 3 books and they're like, they're okay. I guess I'll keep reading them.
Yeah.
At 3 books in, you've either decided that you like this author or you're out and you're going to bail. And sometimes maybe it's the series that you're not jiving with. But for the most part, once you're 3 books in, you're becoming a fan of that author. That is always what I'm looking for as a reader. I always say that when I finish a series or something, I'm not going back in to just find one book to read. I'm looking for the next author to fall in love with that I'm going to then devour their entire backlist.
Right. And I think all readers are looking for that. I've never met a reader who's like, yeah, I have my favorite authors. I'm good. I don't want anyone new. I'm okay. I'm just going to coast on them until they die. Yeah, no one is like that. Everybody is like, I'm ready to fall in love with the next author that I'm going to be a super fan of. Everyone who loves books has that attitude.
Well, because no matter how many books, even some of these writers who are just cranking out a book a month, which is just insane to me, but even those writers, you cannot write fast enough to appease your readers. readers will read that book that took you 3 months. They're done with it in a day. And they're like, well, when's the next book coming out?
Exactly.
Right? Which is a great place to be. The readers that are clamoring for your books and just absolutely waiting for that next release. That's where we all want to be as authors. We want those people salivating. This is where, again, Taylor is masterful at building superfans. All the lead up to Tortured Poets, all the little drops and the little videos and the images and little quotes from the lyrics.
The twos.
All the twos that she's flashing. It's absolutely awesome to me in all the little ways that she's getting everybody excited. And then, of course, you get into the astrology of Taylor because there's people out there going like, well, last night she wore a red skirt, so she's definitely going to drop Rep TV tomorrow. And here's why. Here's the 10 reasons why Taylor's going to announce Rep TV at the last show at Wembley. You know what I mean? Like, and then she does it and they were like, okay, well, I got that one wrong, but it's hilarious. But you don't do that unless you are a super fan. You don't sit around and speculate about what the next book is going to be unless you're a super fan of that.
Can I make a joke about her being like TAnon without it getting political?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The conspiracy theories are dense.
But it's fun.
Oh,
Yeah.
so fun. So fun.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I would say, if you're not a Swiftie, what are you doing listening to this podcast? But if you are, I mean, if you're an author and you haven't listened to her music and you kind of fall down that rabbit hole, the beauty is it's a really great community. It's not a toxic community. I mean, it's the internet. So, you know, like if you dig deep enough, you're going to find toxicity no matter in the bottom of every rabbit hole on the internet. But in general, even if you show up on the Reddit for Swiftie, on the Swifties Reddit forum, most people are pretty nice people. And when they talk about these, we say conspiracy theories, but they're really just people speculating about what she's going to do, what she's going to drop next. And she feeds into that. She's absolutely throwing up twos. She's totally feeding into our frenzy, but that is where we need to be. And this is where I say it's a little different from authors and performers. Nobody's out there taking the paparazzo are not following me around and taking pictures about my next book or whatever. But you don't need to do that.
We have a running joke in my house that like the reality TV show of authors working would be the most boring reality TV ever. Because my husband watches a bunch of these shipbuilders or robot builders or mechanics or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, no one wants to see that on YouTube. An hour of me typing is the most boring thing ever, even to me.
Which is why sometimes, especially in the indie world, I see a lot of indie authors who have a tendency to sort of poo-poo live events. These, like, I'm a fantasy author. Dragon Con is going on right now as we record this, which is the largest fantasy con in the world. And it is absolutely a place. Chances are good if you want to meet one of the biggest authors in the fantasy world, they're probably there right now. And if you want a picture with Brandon Sanderson, that's probably where you're going to go if you want to get one, right? Brandon is a perfect example in the author world of somebody who has consistently built a huge fan base of super fans just by being himself. You'll never meet anybody who was like, oh, I met Brandon. He was an asshole. He just like, oh, he treated me like, no, he's the nicest guy. He would love to sign your book, shake your hand, take a picture. Sure. The great thing is Taylor can't go anywhere without being mobbed. In the author world, I don't know that there's an equivalent. Brandon Sanderson might be one of the biggest, if not the biggest authors in the world right now. And yet he can still walk around the floor at Dragon Con. And sure, some people will want to snap a picture, but he's not going to be mobbed, which is great. That means that if you're a reader, you're a super fan, you can get next to those authors. And it's something that's really kind of unique about the indie world, which is that there's more of a family vibe to it. Even as when we go to author conferences like Author Nation, which used to be 20 books, I'm going to go to NINC here in a few weeks, which is the Novelist Inc. conference. And even if you meet those authors, we're just people behind a keyboard typing out our little stories and creating these worlds in our head and stuff. Most of them are a bit stunned when somebody actually wants a picture with them. You're like, oh, sure. I'll take a picture, sure. Yeah.
I very much was.
Yeah, we're a little bit like, oh, can I take a picture with you so that I have proof to bring home to my family that I have fans?
Yeah. I'm sure that you're probably familiar with Kevin Kelly's theory of 1,000 true fans.
Yeah.
What's amazing is he wrote this back in 2007. So it's been around on the internet for a very long time. It became more popularized as more people grabbed onto it. But the thing that he talked about that was really interesting was that, like, okay, so in the future, creators and artists are going to need to find a way to sell directly to their fans. We all love Amazon. We all love these platforms that are out there that allow us to get our work out into the world. But ultimately, as a creator, you're going to want to find a way to connect directly with your fans so that you can own that relationship. I talk about this in a lot of my talks because BookFunnel we get used a lot. Really, so many of the things that you use BookFunnel for are that direct connection with fans, be it giving away a reader magnet so they join your list, you're selling direct and BookFunnel's doing the delivery. We always say that we're not in the business of building our brand, we're in the business of building your brand. So our job is just to deliver the thing and then get out of the way so that you have the connection with your readers. But what Kelly talked about in his 1,000 True Fans was like, you need to be able to sell directly to your fans. And if you can get 1,000 true fans or super fans, basically to buy your stuff that will buy directly from you, if you can get 1,000 people to spend $100 of their hard-earned money per year, then you can make $100,000 a year, which in most parts of the world, not all, because now it's 2024 and we've got inflation and all that, but generally speaking, you could make a decent living in most parts of the world on $100,000. But the great thing is that the 1,000 super fans are the core of your business. But it's not just going to be 1,000. Those 1,000 people are going to go out and evangelize you to everybody that they meet. They're the ones that are going to drag their friends to the Eras Tour and like, come on, you have to come with me. And then they're going to leave the Eras Tour and be like, no, I'll buy 18 t-shirts. By the time they come in and they bring those people in and go, oh, if you like sword and sorcery fantasy, oh, if I got the author for you, you should pick up this book. And then you're just going to keep converting more and more. And it's exactly what Taylor does. 10 years ago, she was big. I mean, it's not like she's not dropping albums and putting out amazing work, but there were still so many people in the world who hadn't yet discovered her amazingness. And then just more and more, it just starts to pile on.
I think for Taylor, it's the fact that she thought her career was over.
Right? Which is insane to think about now. But yeah, if you ever thought you had imposter syndrome or as a writer that you were just never going to make it, just know that Taylor thought, that's it, I'm done, I'm out. They've ruined me.
Yeah, she thought, was it after Miss Americana or during Miss Americana, she thought that she'd been popular as long as the industry was going to allow her to be popular. And now I'm like, the industry can't touch her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She is an industry. She is her own
Literally,
industry.
Yeah. She's like her own nation. Literally, if you look at the GDP. Yeah. Yeah.
Economy, everything.
What's amazing to me is that as time has gone on, so I published my first book in 2011. This was back during when you could just flop a book out there for 99 cents and you would get sales. And it's much, much harder to do that now. It's much, much harder to make it in the industry. And yet there are probably more authors making a living, an actual living as a full-time writer today than there ever been in the history of publishing. Self-publishing and indie publishing have allowed this revolution to happen. And what is crazy to me is that as I have been in the industry now for 10 years, BookFunnel, we launched in 2015, but I was writing all the code and building it back in 2014 and meeting all these authors and going to conferences. It's amazing to me how many authors that I met that were previously in the traditional world, they were in trad pub, that had thought their careers were over. They said, yeah, I used to have this great series. I had 6 books out. I thought I was going to keep going forever. And all of a sudden my publisher said, yeah, listen, we don't want the 7th book. And I'm like, it has sales. Once you're 7 books into a series, you almost know to the number how many sales you're going to get. And it's profitable. Nah, we don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's not interesting to us anymore. We've got other authors we need to put on the slate or whatever. I met people that quite literally thought, well, I guess that's it. I guess I'm not a writer anymore. Maybe I need to go get another job. And then here comes indie publishing, and suddenly that's not true anymore.
So I came out of Harlequin Romance and I had 20 plus books with them, just shy of 25, which I remember only because Harlequin at 25 books, they have this thing, they give you like a pin, there's a ceremony, all this kind of stuff. And for me, it wasn't that they were done buying my books. It was that I was so done writing them.
Yeah.
Because Harlequin is such a specific product. And I loved writing them. I don't want to imply that I didn't. I loved writing them. That was my dream from childhood. Actual childhood was to write for Harlequin Romance. But at some point I was like, I cannot just fit into this box anymore. And I had people who were like, 2 more books and you get your pen. Why would you not do that? And this was right at that point where Harlequin was starting to get really nervous about indie pubbing. and they were trying to lock their authors down in 6-book contracts. Because before then it had been 2-3 books, and then all of a sudden they realized that they're losing authors, and they're like, hey, do you want a 6-book contract? What about a 10-book contract? And I was like, oh my God, I can't do it. I just couldn't do it. So I was like, I can't do the 2 more books to get to the pen. The pen is just, I could buy myself a pen if I wanted to.
I'm good. I'll get the 23 pen. I'll make my own.
Yeah. But I also was writing, at the time I was writing YA, and I had hit that point with YA where they're like, yeah, we're not as interested anymore. And so it was just this confluence of things where, yeah, the indie pubbing, and I thought I was done also. I was like, I can't write to an audience anymore. I have to be writing something that I want to write. I have to write something I enjoy. And I knew I couldn't do that in trad pubbing. And so I felt like I had no option, because I also felt like I didn't have the business skills to indie pub yet. I didn't have the tools. I didn't have that kind of organization, because yes, I also have ADHD. Having ADHD and having the organizational skills to have a business are the Venn diagram.
Yeah. They just bump into each other. There's no crossover.
Yeah. I don't know. Why did I start talking?
Because we were talking about Harlequin and traditional publishing.
We were talking about traditional publishing. Yeah. This is the other thing about indie pubbing. And I think BookFunnel, this ties back to the BookFunnel Taylor thing, right? Traditionally publishing is not actually interested, especially Harlequin, zero interest in building a brand for an individual writer. They are 1,000% interested in doubling down on their brand.
Exactly.
They have zero interest in building your brand. And indie pubbing allows you to build your brand, tell your stories. BookFunnel is one of those tools that allows you to get your story out there and create your brand in a way that, as a trad author, I didn't have any option of doing, or fewer options of doing.
Which is what you should be doing. And it's an important point, I think, that I try to tell people, which is you don't know necessarily where you're going to go as an author. You're talking about Harlequin, and they definitely had a very, very formulaic way that they wrote their books. Imagine when Taylor was younger and they had said, listen, Fearless was great. Let's do another one of those. And then it's just like, oh yeah, this is great. Listen, you're sounding a little poppy. Let's just stick with that country stuff. It's working really well. Let's just keep doing more of that. And then we wouldn't get Red in 1989 and all of these amazing albums that came afterwards. And yet my wife, Julie, and I were just talking about this the other day, because we tend to talk about Taylor sometimes. What is her brand? And I remember watching the Reputation tour, the recording of the Reputation tour that was on Netflix for a while. And she has this little speech for this moment where she kind of stops and she talks and she says, listen, you guys, my fans, you guys have followed me through this journey as we went from Fearless to Speak Now to Red to 1989 to Reputation, which are very different albums. Each one of them very, very different, even in their stylings. Like Reputation was a complete departure. And I remember in the documentary, Miss Americana, and she gets the call and she's not nominated for any Grammys at all. And she kind of cries and she says, well, I guess I'll just have to make a better album. And yet I think Reputation is amazing. I'm going to the Eras tour in New Orleans and my outfit is Reputation's. I'd show you a picture. I don't have one on me, but it's like black leather pants and a tight black t-shirt. And it's got the red snakes. It's Taylor's bodysuit, but as a man. And she's standing up there, she's talking, and she says, basically, what is her brand to her fans? And really, you can't look at any of her albums in the same way that you'd look at one author's individual books and say, what is your brand? Her brand is, you guys, my fans, like great music with a story. You like the lyrics and you like the storytelling, which is why she can experiment with different styles of music. And her fans are like, I like this too, because underneath that, it's a great story. And apparently people love hearing about her life. But then you get albums like Folklore and Evermore, where she has said, arguably, some of us are like, I don't know, that sounds like it could be you, Taylor.
After TPD, yeah.
Yeah, right. But that is really, without trying to, that is the brand that she has built. Now, I tell authors, you should really think about what is your brand. Sure, you write cozy mysteries or you write small town romance. And that's great. That's a start, but that's pretty broad. A lot of people are writing small town romance right now. So what is it about you? Why should I read your small town romance? What is it as an author? Because each book and each series might be a little bit different, but what is it that ties you back together? What is your author brand? One of my favorite examples is when I started reading indie books, which I think the story probably goes like a lot of people. I got a Kindle. I was reading trad books because that's what I'd read my whole life. I'd just pick up these authors, the authors that I am still a super fan of. There are authors that I read today that I was reading when I was 14 years old, and I still buy all their books. But I got finished with those books, and I'm shopping around, and I come across some fantasy books that were like $2.99, $3. The kid in me that only had $6 to spend at the Walden Books and would spend hours looking at all the little mass market paperbacks because I had exactly $6 to buy one book. I was like, oh my God, a $3 book. And I read it, and it happened to be an amazing fantasy book by an author who I am now a super fan of. And I just loved it, and I thought it was amazing. And I went out looking for other authors. I had probably not read a new author in a decade. I would just kind of pick up and read the books of the authors that I loved and that I had read before. But now I was on this quest to discover new authors. And one of them that I discovered was, part of the reason was, so in 1994, George R. R. Martin's A Game of Thrones is released. And this begins the era of what we call grim, dark fantasy. I don't know if you've read the books, but if you've seen the show on HBO, it's very bloody. None of the characters are likable. You pretty much just hate everybody, and a lot of people are going to die. And that's not why I read fantasy. I read fantasy in the same way that romance readers read romance. I want heroes. I want the good guys to win in the end. I don't always need my heroes to be white knights on horses or anything like that. There can be some gray. And in fact, that's interesting to me. But in the end, I need to know that they're going to turn around and save the world and do the right thing. That is why I read fantasy. That's the payoff for me. And the traditional publishing world had decided, fantasy readers aren't interested in that anymore. We want anti-heroes, heroes that are like, oh no, they don't do the right thing. In fact, they just stabbed the knight in the back and killed him. And like, I'm not enjoying these books. So I kind of dropped out. They weren't publishing books that I wanted to read anymore until here come the indies. And there were other indie authors like me who were like, you know what? Nobody's writing the books that I want to read. I'll go off and I'll write them. I'll write them. I discovered an author named Michael J. Sullivan, who is a fantasy author. And he had, I don't even remember exactly what it was, but he had on his website, on his blog, because back then every author was also blogging. And he had on his blog, it's like Michael J. Sullivan, and it's real heroes, real adventure. And that was sort of his author tagline. And I immediately knew what he was selling. And it was exactly what I had been looking for, because I don't want dark heroes. I want real heroes. And I picked up his books and read him, and I'm now a Michael J. Sullivan superfan. And a lot of people are, and he's a good example of somebody that I point to when I say, if you go Google Michael J. Sullivan Kickstarter, he's probably done a Kickstarter on the last 8 books that he's published. And this is one of the ways that authors are out there selling direct. Kickstarter is selling direct. It's using someone else's platform, and you're putting your book up there, but basically what Kickstarter for authors now is, hey, I'm going to release this book in October. If you'd like to get it early and you'd like to support the author directly, you can pick it up on my Kickstarter. And I have all these cool rewards. I'm doing a special edition hardback, or I'm doing bookmarks, or I've got cool pins that you can only get as part of the Kickstarter. This is all those little special rewards that you get that you're not going to get if you just wait for the book to come out and read it on Amazon or whatever. If you want all these little special little things. But the people that back you on Kickstarter, those are your super fans. Michael J. Sullivan did a Kickstarter, which I backed, and I buy the hardbacks. I am a super fan, so I get the beautiful hardbacks, and I don't read them. I just put them up on my shelf. They're just art pieces. I read the ebook. I'm an ebook reader, but I get the hardbacks because I want them on my shelf for the authors for whom I am a super fan. If I'm just sort of like, well, I like their books, then I'll just pick up the ebook and I'll read it, and that's okay. The Kickstarter he did just a couple of years ago, which was the last book of a trilogy that he finished off, he did over $300,000 on his Kickstarter. And that is for special edition hardcovers and ebooks and the whole deal. He doesn't include the audiobooks. That's something that he does separately. But he did that with just over, I think it was about 3,800 backers. This is kind of the point that I talk about, the 1,000 true fans. The thing that I loved about Kelly's theory was that we would all love to be the author level of Taylor Swift. Millions and millions of fans worldwide. She's a billionaire. She's doing great. We would all love to get there. But if you were an author starting out today and you were writing your first book, Very few people have the personality to be like, well, I'm going to write this book and I'm definitely going to have hundreds of millions of fans worldwide. Most of us are probably thinking this thing's going to flop. Nobody's going to read it because we all have imposter syndrome and we all think that we're terrible. But the beauty that I love about the theory was that even 1 million fans, as a writer, if I were putting out books, that would feel entirely unreachable to me. And you may get there. I would say Brandon Sanderson's got millions of fans. Obviously he does, because a lot of them went and backed his Kickstarter, and Brandon's doing just fine. And yet 1,000 people, that seems reachable. I think I could get to 1,000 fans. And it still takes work. It's not something that you're just going to throw book one out there and you're going to, woo, you made it. You've hit it. But it does seem like an achievable goal that you can reach. I see Kickstarters all the time because now, again, Kickstarters kind of become more of a new thing. And really, it's just a way to test how much of your audience has become super fans. People that are just casually into your books are not going to back your Kickstarter. The people that are backing you on Kickstarter, those are going to be your super fans. I see them all the time where they have 700 backers, 400 backers, 350 backers. So we're not even talking about 1,000, but they're already hitting money. Kevin J. Anderson just finished. He's mostly traditionally published author, right? He writes in the Dune universe with Brian Herbert, but he also writes and publishes a lot of his stuff indie. He decided he was going to take all of his short fiction, all the short stories and short fiction that he's written over the years that he owns the rights to, and he's going to put together a short fiction collection. Nobody's buying your short fiction collection unless you're a super fan. Nobody wants to read that randomly. And yet he had 912 backers on his campaign, and it made over $79,000. Again, we haven't even quite hit the 1,000 true fans. And yet, raise your hand if you'd love to put out a book tomorrow and you already get basically a $79,000 advance. That's people who bought it before it's even on Amazon and published everywhere else. He's reached that level, and he's been publishing for a very long time, but it seems achievable. When you look at the goals that other people have set for themselves, you find that, I think I could do that. I could reach 300 fans, and then maybe I could reach 500 fans, and we'd love to reach Taylor level. But it seems unlikely, and most people wouldn't think that it were likely. But you could reach 1,000. That seems an achievable goal.
Yeah, I mean, I have more than 1,000 on my newsletter.
Right.
400 of them came from organic signups in the back of a book. So they've read my books.
Yeah, organic signups are the best. One of the things that I tell people is that you should, I always talk about bandwidth because I'm a computer geek. And so we always talk about, as indie authors, it seems like, especially if you're just starting, there's a million things you have to learn. You think that the job is writing the book. And then you get to the end of the book and you realize, like, oh God, now there's a million things that I have to learn to get this book out there into the world. And if you want to actually make money, it's rare today, at least for me, because I go to conferences and I meet authors there. It's rare today to meet an author who is, or somebody certainly that would call themselves an author that would use that tag, that is just planning to write one book, their memoir, and then that's it. Most of the ones that I meet, they want to be full-time
careers.
authors. The dream was always that I could make a living as an author, and that's where they want to get to. They're writing these books, and the sad truth is in 2024, writing a book and just putting it out there is not going to get you any readers. If you want to make a living, if that is your goal, you're going to have to learn some of this stuff. And it just seems like there's a million things that we have to learn. So trying not to get too far into the weeds on that about the data and all that sort of things. One of the things that I do say is when you are setting up your mailing list, and if you're listening to this and you don't think that you need a mailing list, Brandon Sanderson would point and say, yes, you absolutely do. Michael J. Sullivan's mailing list. That's how I find out when he has new Kickstarters. I realize in 2024, it seems like who's doing mailing lists anymore? Blah. But I promise you, they're still out there.
Even Taylor has one.
She does.
A terrible one.
I would not point, like, you follow her Insta. That's how my wife has. She gets alerts on her Apple Watch. She'd be like, oh, they made a new post on Taylor Nation. They're over there doing that. But Taylor doesn't have to worry about anything. She's Taylor Swift. But you could be on Instagram or you could be on Facebook. And I always tell people, if you don't own that platform, at some point, Instagram might just shut your account down. I see it on Facebook all the time. My fan page got shut down because apparently whatever, right? I violated some rule that I wasn't even aware existed. And now that's it. My fan page is gone. And all those posts that I made, everything. If you don't own the platform, then there is always a chance that someone can take it away from you. If you have a mailing list, even if you decide to leave MailChimp and go to MailerLite, you just export that list. You have those email addresses, they're yours. And that is how you can always reach your fans directly. Even if you have to move platforms, you have the information, you have the data. The one kind of split that I say that you really should work on is when people sign up for your list to get on your list, you should definitely separate the organic signups from the sort of promotional signups. You can get on BookFunnel, you can join group promos, and you can build a list. And it's great. It's a fantastic tool. It's a great way for readers to find you, because this is the biggest problem in the industry. How do we get more readers to find our stuff and read it? But if someone reads your book, especially if they've read a couple of your books, and they get to the end in the back that you say, oh, hey, I've got this reader magnet, whatever it is, a short story, a novella, some sort of bonus content that they can read. And they get to the end of the book and it says, hey, I hope you enjoyed the book. If you'd like to read a little bonus chapter that comes after the book, you can click here and join my mailing list and read it for free. And if somebody clicks through that and joins your mailing list, that is a very different sign up than somebody who picked up your free thing and was like, man, that looks pretty good. I'll give it a try. And the reason is it becomes a little self-selecting. If you get to the end of a book and you didn't like it very much, you're not going to be like, it was okay. I definitely want to give them my email address so that I can read more of that. So the people that make it onto your list that we call organic traffic is they read your book, they liked your book, they liked it enough to give you their email address, and they wanted to read more of it. That's a data point that you need to hold on to, especially if you know, which you can do, again, not getting technical, you can do all this stuff on BookFunnel. You can actually know which book they came from the back of. So I know that you got onto my list from the back of book 3. You're a fan. Nobody's read to book 3 in a series and it's just sort of like, they're okay. I guess I'll keep reading them. No, if you've gotten to book 3, I already know you're a fan. And now on my mailing list, I can put you, that's the person who, if you were looking to build an advanced reader team, people to get your early reviews, you want the people that signed up from book 3, they're fans already. You can put out a cast and call and just say, hey, would anybody like a free copy of my new book in exchange for an advanced review? And if you gave away 100 copies, you'll probably get 1 review, maybe 3. If you just randomly picked people. Now, if you pick from the pool of people that are already your fans, you're going to get a much higher return. And those are the people more likely to leave those 5-star reviews, because your fans are not going to go back and 1-star dump on you. Having those little data points, like you were talking about, Morgana, there's a big difference between those organic readers. Those are probably the best readers on your list.
Exactly. Yeah. So to keep us on that superfan track.
Yeah.
How do authors grow superfans? Where do we start? Because, it's the 1,000 true fans, but to me, superfans is a step above.
Could be, yeah. Superfans are, again, my definition is somebody who will buy everything that you put out into the world forever. I'm a Brandon Sanderson superfan. He did his Kickstarter, which was massive. And if you haven't seen it, I don't know where you were in the author world. Maybe you weren't here yet, but he did $42 million on his Kickstarter, selling 4 books that he wouldn't tell us the titles of. He wouldn't tell us who was in them, and he wouldn't tell us who the content was. He just said, I have 4 books that I've written that I'm going to give to you if you back this Kickstarter. And people said, shut up and take my money. That is super fans. People that are buying and they don't even know what they're buying. So how do we get there? We've started off and you maybe got 1 or 2 books out. You're putting your books out into the world and you want to start building a super fandom. Number 1 is interact with your fans. And this is where it gets a little hard because, again, like I said, we're authors, we're not performers. The likelihood that we can get up on stage and make people fall in love with us is a lot smaller. But this is where building a mailing list comes in. And you should absolutely start pretty early on trying to build that mailing list. Now, I will tell you, not everyone who joins your mailing list is going to be a super fan, but they are interested in your books. That's why they're here. Use your mailing list this is the hardest part. The number 1 mistake that I see authors doing is they listen to a podcast like this. They listen to Damon from BookFunnel says I should go build a mailing list. And so they go off and they build a mailing list, but then they don't actually talk to them. They're just collecting email addresses like they're coins. And then they're not actually reaching out and talking to them. And you do have to talk. Now, if you are not the kind of person who wants to share personal details about your life, That's okay. You don't have to be that author who's emailing and talking about you and your personal journey or anything like that. But you do have to talk about something. I'm a fantasy author. If I were on my mailing list and I didn't have, first of all, don't just email everybody and say, I'm still, in the case of fantasy, this is a really bad thing that a lot of fantasy authors do. I'm still working on the next book. Oh, it's coming along. It's coming along. It's coming along. I'm tired of hearing that. Give me something else. Talk about the things that you are, if not doing in your life, the things that you're enjoying in your life. Again, I'm a reader of fantasy. I read in bed every single night. So if I didn't have anything else, I would talk about, hey, I picked up this great new series by Django Wexler. If you guys haven't read it, it's not a lot like my books, but it's great fantasy. You should pick it up, right? And these are the little things, especially when you talk about Taylor, the way that she's made connections with all of these fans through her Instagram. Obviously, when she's on stage, she's a presence and she's making these great connections with those fans. But most people are not at the Eras Tour. Most people are connecting with her through her social media and things like that. And if you're able to do that, you absolutely should. I know some authors that absolutely crush their social media. And then I know most authors who are like, I don't know what to post. I'm not a face for TikTok or whatever, right? We all feel that way. But that is how you start to make connections. The first way is people discovering you through your books. But then you're going to want to start deepening that relationship. Not to push BookFunnel, but a lot of the authors that I know that have built these big super fandoms, they're doing it through bonus content. This is the, hey, if you like this book, I have a little bonus chapter you might want to read. What I love about those is just like Taylor dropping tracks and dropping hints and all these things. That is what kind of pulls people into your world. Your books are what get me here. Her albums are what get you to go, she's pretty good. I like that stuff. She's good. I like the books or I like the albums. But it's all the little things and the little bonuses that start coming in that start going, oh, like the pin that Harlequin wants to give you. It's like, oh, hey, why don't you stay for 25 books? You get a pin. And if you can do that, if you can do those sorts of things, the easiest one is bonus content like bonus chapters, extended epilogues, novellas, little ways that draw those fans in and let them know that, hey, if you're on my list, you're getting cool stuff that other people don't get, right? If they're not on the list, they're not getting the little bonus short stories that I release once a month or every couple of months. And it's a great technique. I've seen authors use this really effectively where they're not chatty. I don't know how to get on my mailing list and talk about myself or my books, or I'm too embarrassed to talk about my books because we do that imposter syndrome. Oh, I don't know why anybody reads my books. Don't do that. First of all, they're there and they are reading your books. So they must like something about it, but we all do this. I've seen authors really effectively use this technique where they basically go, hey, I'm still working on the next book. I had this great idea for a fun short story with this character, some character they've pulled out of their stories that everybody loves. I had a great idea for a short story. I thought you guys would like it. Here. Go download it and read it. And that right there says it's a little bit of that, well, you're getting this because you're on my mailing list. You can't go buy this on Amazon. You only get that if you're here on my list and you're getting this special thing from me. Those little things, it's a chipping away sort of thing. Very few people, like my journey to becoming a Swiftie was probably 10 years. Like, oh, that's good music. Oh, that's another good song. I like that song. And then eventually I make a little playlist and I like some of her music. And then at some point I listen to a whole album and I go, man, she's incredible. And now I'm going back and listening to all of her albums and I'm like, oh my God, my mind is blown. She's incredible the whole time and I didn't even know it.
And then you spend 12 hours straight listening to Tortured Poets anthology over and over again, dissecting all the lyrics.
And then you do that. And that is what we become. But it's a journey. And that's why we call it the reader, or I call it the reader journey. It's not, very few people read one book and go, oh my God, I'm a super fan of this author. I'll buy everything forever. Now you might read a book and go, wow, that's really good. Does this author have any other books? I do that all the time. But I haven't become a fan yet, not until I've had a few books. So the number one thing I would say is keep writing your books. That's always the most important thing, because the more books you have out there, the more ways that people can discover you. There's a reason BookFunnel is called BookFunnel, and it's because of that funnel that marketing has been doing for 100 years. And it's this idea that you have to get a lot of people in the top so that you can get a few people out the bottom. It's a funnel, but the ones that come out the bottom, those are the ones that we can start to push in towards becoming super fans. But the first thing you got to do is you got to get more people in the top. So more books. And then, like I said, people aren't going to become a super fan after just reading one of your books. You need to have several of those books out there so that they read one and they go, that was good. I'd like to read another one. And they read another one and they go, that was good too. I think I like this author. And then they read the third one and they go, okay, now I really like this author. I wonder what else they've got out there. And that's when they're joining your mailing list. That's when they're really excited to hear about what you've got coming out next. People love to feel special. Everybody loves it. And that's why I say, if you are out there and you are writing bonus content or even whatever it is, if you are the kind of person who can do little 3D printed plastic coins and put them in the mail to people, it's like, hey, if you've read all 5 of my books, you get a 5-book pen. Email me. And then you send them a little questionnaire about the 5 books. And then you email them this little thing. But that little thing, that little coin that probably cost you 50 cents in the post, that thing that nobody else got because they didn't read the books and they didn't fill it out, that thing makes people feel special. And anything that you can do that makes people feel special, that's what starts to make super fans. When you talk about Taylor and she flashes the deuce and only the fans get it. If you're not a Swiftie and you just happen to see some picture where she's just holding 2 fingers down outside of a restaurant, they don't get it. They don't know it. But the rest of us are like, I see what she did. Marvel is masterful at this. If you watched any of the movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, they love to put their little Easter eggs in there that if you're not a huge Marvel fan, it just goes right past you. And that's okay. You didn't need it in order to enjoy the movie. But for the super fans, did you see? It was on the subway wall. Did you see it? That makes us feel special. And that makes us keep coming back.
Yeah. Subway wall, the cloth and the missing albums. Yeah.
Exactly. Or the video that she put out before TTPD where she's flashing through all these rooms and people did like frame by frame analysis. Look at the clock and you see the arms on the clock and look what was on the desk.
And the calendar and then the installations. Yeah.
Exactly.
Anytime she wears orange, that means that she's dropping Karma next.
Yeah. But what is that? I can't even imagine what she would have spent to make that video. That video, that's the bonus content I'm talking about. That was for the fans. Nobody else in the world watched or cared or needed that video. The whole thing was just for the fans to speculate. She produced that. She probably wrote it. She and her collaborators, like she's got a whole team of people, but they put all that, let's make the clock say this, let's flash down and, let's just show them briefly what's on the desk. And then the camera moves away really quickly. That was a whole production. They put all of that out there. She paid to have that whole thing made. Why? So that her fans could have something that was just for them. Because anybody else watching that would go, what the heck did I just watch? What was that? But the fans, they were counting the tiles on the floor. Like, there were 12 tiles on. All that. That was just one giant bonus content. But look what it did for her fans. It made them feel like she did this just for us.
Well, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about people wanting to be seen, and something we've talked about a lot, Morgana and I, about people wanting to feel like they're part of a group, like they have a community that is theirs. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a space where people feel like they are seen, they belong, they're part of the crowd.
The tribe.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the word that we hear a lot. The great thing is like the internet, well, for good or for worse, the internet has allowed people to find their tribe all over the world because there were so many people growing up that they were younger. And I know for me, I read fantasy, I played Dungeons and Dragons, and I found my tribe in my little town, in my little high school. I found my friends who were all into the same geekery that I was into. But now with the internet, you can find those people anywhere, and they don't have to be in your tiny little town that you can find. So if you want to become a Swiftie, guess what? There are places you can hang out online and you can find all those people who are into that geekery, the same thing that you're into. And that's a beautiful thing. In some cases, it's also kind of a dangerous thing. But for the most part, let's call it a net positive and say that it's great that wherever you are in the world, you can find that thing that you're into. And what's great is like, you might reach the level of an author where you can do that on your own, where you yourself are a brand unto yourself and you have built this up. But I see lots of examples of authors kind of grouping up together to do that same thing collectively. We all write small town romance. Well, guess what? If they read small town romance and they love that, they're always looking for more small town romance to read. So if you write it and I write it, well, then our readers, they share an interest. So, hey, why don't we work together? There's actually a group of romance authors that they do a Kickstarter once a year, where they did one just 2 years ago. It was called Dangerous Tides. So if you go look it up and go Google for Dangerous Tides Kickstarter. One thing I love about Kickstarter, and the reason I use it as an example, is not because there's like the most awesome platform in the world or that the only one around. What I do love is that every one of their projects, once they're over, it's like an archaeology. You can go back and you can see their project. You can see how they did it. As authors, we can study other authors' successfully funded projects and go, what did they offer? How many backers did they get? How did they do all of this? If you go look at the Dangerous Tides Kickstarter, this was 6 dark romance authors. So again, they're all writing in the same genre. And they pick a theme. Dangerous Tides was pirates. They said, okay, cool. All 6 of us are going to write a pirate dark romance, each in our own way. They're not a series. There are no characters spread across it. We're just like, but if you like dark romance, here we are. There's going to be 6 books. They had just shy of, it was 2,700 backers, or just a little bit more than 2,700 backers. But that Kickstarter did over $400,000 because each one of them brought their own fans. They each have their own list. But I know that if you're on my list, you like dark romance. Well, guess what? I've got one for you. And for sure, if you back this Kickstarter, for sure, you're going to get one of my books because I wrote in it. But you're also going to get 5 other dark romance by authors that you may not know yet, but you can discover them. And they've done many successful Kickstarters since then, but all around the same idea. They pick a theme, they take 6 romance authors who all write in the same genre, and then they collectively do this big Kickstarter together. I love that because each one of them individually is probably not going to bring in a $400,000 Kickstarter. But if we get 6 of us together and we're all writing the same genre, we're trading fans. I mean, it's back when I was a kid, I used to read anthologies. I was the kid who would pick up the anthology because the one story in it that was written by my writer that I was a super fan, I wanted to read his story. But now I've paid $6 for this book. So by God, I'm going to read these other stories too. And I would find other characters and other authors and other people that I would like. That was really good. I've never read any of his books, but I like that character. I wonder if there's more of that. If you're lucky, you might vault to the heights where eventually you are your own brand and you have your 1,000 true fans and you're doing your own thing. But it might be good to start off a little smaller and collectively find those authors that are doing it in the same. Don't join a dark romance promo if you write sweet small town romance. Maybe stick with something. But the great thing is, unless you're super, super niche, and even if you are, I promise you there are people out there that want to read what you're writing. Unless you're super, super niche, there are lots of authors out there that are writing what you're writing that you can work with.
Yeah. Another question I had, Sue. So this is a slight pivot.
Okay.
You know what? The backlash that Taylor's had, like, not even backlash. It's just the shiny things. When somebody is shiny, people want to take a hit at her.
Absolutely.
Or him. And we saw this with Rena Kent with her special editions it was a special edition box set that she's put out.
Yeah.
And like there was all of this uproar over her using the term superfans.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, like, should we be thinking about our verbiage in keeping those terms away from readers? I've seen threads blow up over the tiniest thing. And so many things blown out of proportions. Part of me is like, no. That division that will find a problem, everything. There's nothing wrong with the term superfans. But, how do you feel about it?
I think on the internet, somebody's going to find something to complain about. I do think that it's a double-edged sword. The bigger that you get, the more people want to take you down. Yeah, I see people now that hate Taylor who've literally never listened to her music. They just hate her because she's big. And they're like, oh my God, I would never listen to a Taylor Swift album because blah, 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 blah. And then they compare them to an artist that they love. And it's like, hey, that's great. Why do you got to yuck everybody's yum? But there are people out there that are like professional haters, and that's what they want to do. So I guess my initial impression would be like, if somebody's offended by the word super. Now, if you were using actual offensive language, well, then maybe dial that down. But I think if anything, people probably get offended by the word superfan because they don't want to necessarily think of themselves as that. Or like, well, I'm just backing the Kickstarter because I like their books. I wouldn't say that I'm a super fan. Okay, but why did you feel the need to point that out? Other than just, I guess you just wanted to point out that, well, I'm not one of them. It's like, look, if we can all, as authors, if we can reach the point where our fans have, it cracks me up how many authors, because the bigger authors, they do have groups of superfans. And what's amazing is just like the Swifties, they usually give themselves their own name. The creator almost has no power over what their fans are going to start calling themselves. I think that's fantastic. Some people hate it because they're just like, oh God, I can't believe they called themselves that. And yet you don't necessarily control that. If you reach a level like that, eventually you're going to have your fans that have gone and done their own things, and you're going to kind of lose control of that ship. That should be a good thing. If they're calling themselves Swifties because they've decided that that's the name for what we are, we should all be so lucky that we have fans that have decided on a name for themselves.
Yeah.
In the fantasy world, if you've ever seen the show Firefly, all the Firefly fans started calling themselves browncoats because that was the word that they used for the rebellion in the show. The people that fought on the side of the rebellion, they all wore like brown dusters and they called themselves browncoats. And so that became the word. What's great is just like, I mean, Swifties has obviously become so big that even my mother knows what a Swiftie is, but that's because she's reached such heights that you can't not know it. And yet, if I went to a con and I had a little pin that said browncoat, only other people like me are going to go, I recognize you. I see you. And that's because we share that passion. My feeling is it's the internet. If you reach a certain height, people are going to dump on you just because you have reached that height. And they're going to make hay out of anything that they can find, any reason they can find to dislike you or just point out that they don't like this thing that you're doing.
Yeah. We've gone slightly over.
I talk a lot.
Oh, it's a good thing, though.
It is, yeah.
Are there any other things you can think of that you've learned from Taylor that you think that you really want to share now?
Going back to the sort of direct, right? So not necessarily direct sales, but just the direct connection with your audience. And this is what the 1,000 True Fans is based on. And of course, it's talking about money and selling. And do not discount that. As authors, you need to sell. And this is the hard part, is because as artists, some people feel like they're selling out just because they're selling. But the truth is that if you want to make a living at this and you're not planning on just working your day job and just throwing if you want to just throw your writing out there, go on Wattpad or Royal Road and just put your stuff out there for free if that's what you're planning to do. But if you really want to make money at this, you're going to have to sell stuff. And a lot of us are really uncomfortable with that. But no matter what you do, the thing that Taylor did, and it's so funny because I look at her career path and I see somebody who has, in my eyes, started in traditional publishing. And she had great success and she was doing really well. And then somewhere along the way, about Lover, she started to figure out that if she didn't own these albums, somebody else was going to own her. And that's why Scooter Braun and all of his crew ended up owning all the way up through Reputation. And now she's re-recording them and she's like, no, screw you. I'm going to take mine back. And she's able to do that. But starting at Lover, she said, no, these are my albums. I owned them. And it was at that point that she started to make a switch, in my eyes, from sort of traditional publishing to self-publishing. Producing an album is nothing like producing an ebook. The beauty of the path that many of us authors have chosen is, for a $45 copy of Scrivener, you can put a book out into the world for very little money. You really can do it for $0 if you want to. I don't recommend it. I would recommend you pay for a decent cover and maybe even have an editor and all that sort of stuff. But really, if you wanted to, you can put it out into the world for $0. And you're really unlikely to produce an album like Taylor is producing without the help of teams of people and musicians and other people. She's not as indie as the rest of us, and yet she owns that IP. She owns all of those albums. She can put them out into the world in whatever way that she wants. And that is a very indie sort of thing. She can do it because she's reached such heights that no record company, anybody, is going to tell her how to do it. She calls Apple and says, hey, listen, TTBD is going to drop in a couple of weeks. I'd like to put out some playlists of mashups of the stages of grief. And like, I'm going to put all this stuff together. And Apple's like, whatever you want, Taylor, we'll just do that. We'll just go ahead and do that. That's that journey from traditional to indie sort of publishing, because she has that direct connection with her fans That's probably the most important lesson that you could take away from her. If you were to look at what she has done in the beginning of her career, the record companies absolutely owned her image. And she's talked about it before, her doing shows and things that they made her do that she didn't want to do them. She didn't want to do it like that, or she didn't want to do it their way. She wanted to do it her way. But no. The handlers are like, no, we're doing it this way. This is how you become successful. We're telling you, and you need to listen because you're just a young girl and you don't know what you're talking about. So we're going to tell you how to be successful. I would argue that she has reached the level that she has now because she told all those people to shut up and she just became herself. So as indie authors, you're starting out from there. You start out being yourself, and that is what you want to sell. And like I said, talking about sort of branding yourself as your author. And the best lesson I can learn from what she has done is make that direct connection with your fans, however you want to do it. If you love Facebook, if you love Instagram and TikTok, some authors are absolutely brilliant at that. Others just do their little mailing list and that's all. Lucy Score is a romance author and a good friend of mine. She has a gigantic mailing list. I mean, just giant. And she emails every week. And for all the things that she does in her career, she writes her books and she's got people and her husband runs the business and they do all of that sort of stuff together. But the one thing that she writes every one of those emails herself because it's a part of her brand. And it's the one thing that she doesn't want someone else doing for her. When you get on her list, and if you're not on it, you should go and get on it. Even if you don't read romance, even if you don't like her particular brand of romance, you should absolutely go and join her list to see how she makes superfans. And it's like following Taylor's Insta and seeing how she's making these people into superfans. The people that pick up and casually find your stuff, back to your question, how do we make the superfans? Go look at the people who are doing it really, really well. And maybe you can't do exactly what they're doing, but find the nugget of what they're doing that is turning. And a lot of it is that making people feel special. You are here because you wanted to be here. And guess what? Everybody else here, they're part of your tribe. So this is a place where you can geek out and nobody's going to make fun of you for your geekery. Nobody's going to say, oh, you like that? Of course you like that. That's why you're here. But creating that direct connection is the most important thing, because otherwise you just have people out there reading your books and not really becoming those super fans of you as the author.
Yeah. Yep. That's perfect. As always, it's the stepping stones, isn't it? It seems like this big, massive, nebulous thing that's going to take forever. I've been out for 3 years and I probably have some super fans, but it doesn't feel like I've hit that level. And it does very much come down to, as you said, the more people who find you and enter the funnel, the more that come out the other end as super fans. And you've just got to keep adding people to the funnel.
It is a numbers game, and it feels daunting because you know that, let's say out of 1,000 people that read your book, that pick up your books and start reading them, the general numbers that I hear across the industry are in a series, from book 1 to book 2, there's about a 50% drop off. 50% of people read book 1 and go, that was good. I think I'll pick up book 2. The other half are like, not for me. I'm not going to continue. And then from book 2 to book 3, there's about a 20% drop off. And then once you hit book 3, I mean, I know people that have 16 book series and their drop off is almost nothing past, just a few percentage points past book 3, because once they get there, well, now you're hooked. Again, 3 books in, I'm in love with this series and I want to know how the story ends. I want to know how it goes. But yeah, you still got to, when you think about those numbers and it's like, okay, 1,000 people read book 1 and 500 of them go on to read book 2. And then of those 500, 400 will actually go on to read book 3. You're talking about getting people into your funnel. It's probably even much lower numbers than that. So it is a numbers game. You've got to get a lot more people in the top so that you can get more people out the bottom. But it does feel very daunting, especially when you're first starting out. You've just got that first book. And the likelihood that you're going to be able to find even that first 100 people to read your book is going to be hard, but it can be done. Again, I have to believe, because I know I meet them at conferences all the time, there are more authors making a real living, actually making a living as an author today than probably have ever existed in publishing. I have met authors that I have read, that I read when I was a kid. I met authors who know that are friends with the authors that I read. And I've learned that that author that I grew up loving and I read all of their books, yeah, they didn't make a living as an author. They were a high school chemistry teacher and they wrote the books on the side because the traditional publishing industry took all their money. And you're like, these books that I love that for me are like a core part of my being, and they couldn't make a living at that. That was so sad to me. But some of those same authors have now moved over to indie and they're like, no, I'm going to take it on and I'm going to do it myself. So it's out there. The possibility is out there, but it's not going to be a free ride. That's for sure.
As everything in this industry, it takes work.
Yep.
And patience.
Patience and time. But if you keep writing and you keep putting the books out there, it's not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed. But you're going to have zero chance if you stop writing and you're not putting books out there into the world for more people to read.
Exactly. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. What we tend to do on our final question is ask what Taylor song you're obsessed with right now.
Oh, obsessed with right now. I would say probably the one that I sing. My wife gets up every morning and while she's getting ready, she puts on Taylor. Sometimes it's a shuffle. Lately, it's been Tortured Poets just over and over and over and again. So I would say like the one that sticks in my head that I've been singing, that I've been doing a lot lately, because my wife and I have been having this discussion about, and you see these online all the time, but just like, what is the best bridge? Because Taylor loves a good bridge.
Yeah.
At this point right now, I would say it's the bridge from The Smallest Man That Ever Lived. It's just, it's heartbreaking and beautiful and brutal. And we don't have to talk about who she's singing about, but I would not want to be that dude. That's one that's stuck in my head that's on a loop right now, particularly when you get to that bridge where you sent by someone who wanted me dead. And you're just like, oh God, I would not want to be the guy that she's singing about here.
Yeah, I think that entire album is really full of amazing bridges.
It really is. My wife says we have this good back and forth where she loves that one, but she also loves the bridge from, oh God, what was the other one that she's stuck on? Can't stick it, but we go back and forth and she'll switch it around every once in a while because she's like, oh, I don't know, this one's a really great bridge. But yeah, Tortured Poets is full of fantastic bridges.
Yeah.
I would say for fun bridges, very few songs on Tortured Poets, you'd be like, whoa, that's a jam. We're like, woo. I would say for like fun bridges, obviously the one in Cruel Summer is probably my favorite fun bridge, which of course is great because during the Eras tour, she says, can I get everybody to sing this bridge with me? And of course, you're just screaming it and belting it out because everybody knows it and it's a great bridge. But I wouldn't say that it's a better bridge than The Smallest Man Who Ever Lived. Lyrically, that one is incredible.
Emily, what about you?
I have been re-listening to Folklore. And so Exile is just such a great song. That's a great, like, belt it out in the car as you're driving if you're alone or with other people if you want to torture them.
So what I'm hearing is this is what we're going to be doing the weekend after Automation. We've rented an Airbnb to decompress together and get some work done. And
oh, it's good.
It's going to be Taylor Swift on repeat and us screaming the songs.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Exactly. What's yours, Morgana? What's your hit right now?
So I edited our next episode today and I brought up Getaway Car in that, and now it's stuck in my head again.
Yep.
I think Getaway Car's been my favorite a couple of times, and it just keeps getting stuck in my head. And then I'll see YouTube clips of where she blended Getaway Car with Into the Woods.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just done. Like, I was just on repeat all the way through. And there's compilations I found on YouTube of every single surprise song. There's compilations of every one of these like mergers she's done. And I just need an album. I need her to release an official album that's merging certain tracks.
All these mashups. Yeah, I love that she kind of reached a point where it's like, okay, well, she finished the first half of the Eras tour and it's like, well, I've done all these surprise songs. And so now how do I surprise them in another way? We're going to bring it right back around. Bonus content. How do I make you feel special? I was there the night she did this mashup and she's never done that exact mashup ever again. I got to see something live that no one else except the other 90,000 people in Wembley. I was there for that moment that was only a moment. Yeah, I love that she turned it around and started going, okay, well, I've basically done every song as a surprise song that I could do. So how do I make this special for these people? Because I was there in LA where she did King of My Heart. But how do I make it special for them? I'm going to give them something even more different. I'm going to start mashing them together so that every person that comes to any one of my shows has something that they got for being there that night that no one else is ever going to get again. I'm not going to ever mash these two songs together like this again. You get it only because you're here.
Yeah. And then she had Cam every night. His line in We're Never Getting Back Together changed.
Yeah.
The compilations of him saying his lines in multiple different languages and dialects is very funny as well.
Which is awesome. And that's where I say that she really is masterful at making Superfans, because she's figured out that everybody wants to feel a little special. Everybody wants to feel that they're, and what's crazy is everybody wants to individually feel special, and everybody wants to feel like they're part of this tribe. All the little hints and the things that she drops, that's tribe stuff. That's you and I geek out about that because we're big Swifties and we're total geeks about it. And then the things where I go, when you go to my concerts, you're getting these special little things that you can't get anywhere else. That makes everybody feel like you got something. You are special. That's where she's masterful at all of this.
Yeah.
I want to make a note that she does this with such apparent joy. It's very playful. I mean, I've heard her talk about it using those terms. She was playing for herself, and then she realized the fans wanted to play with her, and then it became even more fun. I think for those of us who, the genre readers and writers who are in it for the payoff of whatever happily ever after is for your genre, we've got to come to this with joy, because I think that's what we crave. Those of us who don't write super dark fantasy and super dark romance.
And that's what your fans want, whatever that is from you. But fans can smell insincerity. It's when I've seen authors, especially back in 2011, I can't tell you how many authors you would see in some forum. He'd be like, I could write, especially some guy, right? It's like, I could write romance. Romance is easy. You just make them happily ever after and give them a little bit of this and that. And they'd be like, and then they would just crash and burn because, no, I don't think you get it. If you don't read the genre, you don't know why people love the genre. Even if you think you get it because you've like, oh, well, I got all the right beats. Yeah, but we can smell your insincerity. It reeks of desperation and money.
Yeah. Well, I think that is us. Thank you again for joining us. Do you want to plug anything? I mean, everybody knows where to find you.
BookFunnel.com if you're interested and you want to go look. But we're not here to plug stuff. We're here to talk about Taylor.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. This episode's probably going to be out in October. So we'll actually see you after this episode drops because it'll come up before the nation.
Yeah. And I'll be at the Eras Tour in New Orleans in October.
Oh, rub it in, what I do.
Yeah.
I'll show you guys some pictures at Author Nation after.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we always struggle to end.
Yeah.
So I'll let Emily do it because she figures it out somehow.
Like a Southern potluck. We'll all just stand around. Well, I guess it's time we head on out.
So I will officially end it with, thank you for coming on the show. And even if you didn't plug BookFunnel, I'm a bit of a super fan. So I think I did an admirable job of not geeking out and being a dork about BookFunnel. Yeah. So
Thank
that's
you guys
how we'll
for
end
having
it.
me.
Thanks for listening.